In this video, I want to give you guys my first impressions of my 340i. After driving it just over a week, I've put 1,500 miles on it. If that sounds crazy, I bought the car in Florida and then drove it back to Michigan. But just like when I bought my E90 6 years ago, I don't know anything about these cars yet. I didn't watch like any YouTube reviews or anything like that. So this is going to be a learning experience for me, and I'm excited to take you guys along for the ride. So in this video, I just want to give you my first impressions, let you know some things that I like about the car, some things that I don't compared to my E90. And yeah, I'm really excited for this, to start this journey with this car. So the first thing that really struck me about this when I first stood next to it in person at the dealership and I first sat down in the driver's seat is that this is a bigger car. The F30 generation grew in every dimension, most notably the length, where it's nearly 4 inches longer depending on where you measure from. And believe me, you feel every inch of that. Now, in the big scheme of things, it's still one of the smaller cars within BMW's lineup, but compared to my E90, like after being so accustomed to driving that for 6 years, this does feel like a larger vehicle in comparison. The interior of this car feels really familiar coming from an E90. BMW tends to be evolutionary rather than revolutionary when it comes to their interior design. I know a lot of car journalists kind of knock BMW for sticking with the same layout for multiple generations, but my opinion is, why fix something that's not broken? The gauge cluster is virtually unchanged from the E90. You have the large equal-sized speedometer intact, makes it really easy to read, and then the F30 adds oil temperature to that. I'm assuming that has to do with these cars being turbocharged. That's a good gauge to keep an eye on. But other than that, it's a pretty familiar space if you've been in any other BMWs from the last 10 or 15 years. One welcome addition to the F30 interior is real adult-sized cup holders. The cup holders in the E90 suck. They're flimsy as hell. You have to like reach across the dashboard to get your drink, which always felt awkward. And this might seem like a small thing, but trust me, like on our 22-hour drive back from Florida, this was like one of the things that I was most excited about the whole car. Other than that, all the materials in here feel premium, and I think that the coral red leather is just gorgeous, and that combination with the white exterior to me was worth the trip down to Florida to buy the car. The seats are comfortable yet supportive. They've got these nice thick bolsters on the side. On these seats, the thigh support is adjustable, which is nice. And then the dashboard and the doors actually have these little ambient lights that come on at night, and I think it just makes the interior feel a little bit more upscale compared to the E90. So like I said in my introduction video, I'm not an infotainment guy like at all, so having the smaller screen here doesn't really bother me too much. But that being said, the 340i was the highest trim F30 that BMW ever made, so why they wouldn't just throw in the larger screen by default is kind of beyond me. I mean, the original sticker price of this car that I'm sitting in was just over $50,000. So come on BMW, throw us a bone here. But anyway, it looks like that screen's going to be pretty easy to upgrade, and I'm sure that that'll make for a very helpful video for you guys in the future if I decide to upgrade that. So the biggest thing that people tend to be critical of on the F30 generation is BMW abandoning their really good hydraulic steering in favor of electric steering, which they use on all of their newer cars. Now on the 340i, when you put the car into sport mode, it does make the steering a lot heavier, but what you're missing is the actual feedback through the wheel, and that gives it kind of a numb feel. You don't feel as connected with the road or the driving experience. And I will say that this is a big downgrade coming from an E90, probably the biggest thing that I noticed from a driving perspective. So let's talk about wheels, or maybe more importantly, quality control. Anytime that BMW does this sort of two-tone look where the inside of the spoke is painted and the outside is just like raw aluminum with a clear coat over it, over time that clear coat fails, water gets underneath there, and the wheel starts to corrode. And this is a pretty widespread problem. These wheels, despite the car only being 3 years old and 34,000 miles when I bought it last week, already have that issue with them. And when you consider, again, the price of this car, $50,000, and these wheels, I was looking at the window sticker, these were a $900 option. Somebody actually paid extra to get these, which is kind of weird, but for me, it doesn't really matter because I'm planning to change these. In fact, I've already got new wheels on the way, but a lot of people, like the guy that optioned this car out, he wanted these wheels, and I would be really disappointed if I paid $900 for these, and within 3 years, they're already having problems. Now, speaking of corrosion, we can't overlook the center caps, which are already corroding, which is a problem with all BMW center caps. No matter what car, no matter what year, they all start to get corrosion around the outside. And the irony is that when you buy the cheap, like knockoff ones from eBay, they actually last a lot longer than the real BMW ones. So I think that BMW needs to go to some of these factories in China that are ripping off their design and take notes on how to make some longer lasting center caps. So taking a look under the hood here of the 340i with the B58 engine, there are some welcome changes coming from an N52 E90. I think in a lot of ways that they made like routine maintenance a little bit simpler on this car. If you just look at the airbox, there's only 4 clips that hold it on and it just snaps off and your air filter's right there. On the N52, you have to disconnect the mass airflow sensor, take the airbox out of the car, and there's like 10 Torx bolts that bolt the two parts of the airbox together. And it's so simple, a couple seconds you've got that done, and it just makes your life a lot easier. Another big thing that I noticed right away is on the E90s, they had the cabin air filter in the engine bay and it took up a lot of space. And anytime that you wanted to do any work on the car, whether it's changing spark plugs, ignition coils, valve cover gasket, all of those jobs would start with taking off that giant airbox in the back of the engine bay. So with this car, I believe they moved the cabin air filter to the glove box. I could be wrong about that, but it just frees up a lot of space in here and it just makes things a lot more accessible without having to spend time taking things apart to get to the part that you're trying to work on. The oil filter on the B58 is still on the top of the engine, but it's kind of tucked in on the side. It's not quite as accessible as the N52, but not the end of the world. Another convenience feature that I noticed right away is that on this motor, it's a lot easier to take the plastic covers off. On the N52 and N54, where things might have been held in with like 8mm nuts or Torx bolts in some cases, like with the engine cover, all of these things are just held on with rubber grommets, so you can literally just again, not that big of a deal, but it's the small things like this that just make your life a little bit easier when it comes to routine maintenance. Overall, the engine bay seems to be really well insulated from the elements, and even the top of the strut tower has like this rubber insulator piece which will without a doubt prolong the life of the front struts. So one more thing to get excited about under the hood here is that BMW has gone back to a traditional mechanical style water pump on the B58 engine. So for those that don't know the significance of that, on the E90s they used an electric water pump, which is like a standalone electric motor that ran independent from the engine. And while it was a clever idea and it had some unique advantages, it was ultimately one of the weakest points on the car. They had a short lifespan and they were known to fail without any warning, often leaving people stranded on the side of the highway. So with the traditional mechanical water pump that's in this car, in theory, just by design, it should be more reliable, but only time will tell. This is kind of a newer engine. So out on the road, the first thing that I immediately noticed coming from an E90 is the steering feel or lack thereof. So on the 340i, you can put the car into sport mode and it does firm up the wheel, it gives you more resistance. But the thing that you're missing is the actual feedback through the wheel. You don't really feel anything, and the result is this sort of numb and disconnected driving experience. And it's really a shame because the E90 steering was so good, and this is like such a step in the wrong direction in my opinion. Coming from an E90, I'd say that the steering feel is the worst thing about this car. So let's talk for a second about transmission choice, because I know this is a point of controversy. I did choose the 8-speed automatic, and some people are kind of disappointed about that, but I just went into it with an open mind. I just wanted the best possible combination of engine and transmission, and for this car, I believe that that's the B58 with the 8-speed automatic. Just after driving my friend Brian's 335i a couple years ago, I was just so impressed with it that as a manual fanboy, I never thought that I'd see the day where I'd buy an automatic, but I was just so impressed with that experience that that helped me make my decision. So here's a question for you guys. What makes you more of a real car guy? Choosing the best option in terms of performance, or just choosing something out of tradition because you'll have like the street cred and like other car guys will respect you because you know how to drive stick? I get it. Like I said, I've been driving stick for 10 years. There's like a nostalgia to it. Everyone remembers when their dad or their uncle took them out to learn how to drive stick for the first time. You probably remember the exact year and model of car. But for me, you know, I've done it, I've experienced it. I still have the FRS if I get the itch to, you know, use a clutch pedal. But for me, the transmission in this car is just so good that I thought that it was worth getting the automatic. And I think that even if you've got your mind made up, you want the manual transmission, you owe it to yourself to at least try the automatic, because honestly, I think you might be surprised. It just shifts so fast. So that's just my first impressions after having the car just over a week. I'm sure that I'll learn more about it and I'll have more things to report back to you guys. But so far I'm just loving the car. On the last video, there were only a couple people that were really disappointed with this purchase. And by a couple, I mean literally 2 people wrote paragraphs explaining why they had to unsubscribe and they can't watch my content anymore because I'm not the same person. But for me, I think this was just the right choice, especially for my channel. You know, I've been doing E90 videos for over 5 years. I've done like 370 videos on that car, so to say that I was burned out was an understatement. I think this is just a step in the right direction. It's still a 3 Series, so it's still going to be relatable to a lot of people. And I don't even want to really call it an upgrade because I still honestly believe that E90s are phenomenal cars. I would still recommend most E90 models over most F30s. I just think for me the 340i was just the right choice. There's a lot more options as far as performance modifications that I didn't have before with my old car. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this, and I'm just looking forward to making more content for you guys. So give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this initial review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.